Welcome. I hope you are having a wonderful night, dear viewer. Tonight, I will be telling some terrifyingly scary stories. Make sure to leave your feedback on the comments so I can make this the best experience for you. And if you have any stories you would like me to tell, you can send them through the link in the description. Let's begin. A few years back, I had this really creepy experience with an older coworker of mine that still kind of shakes me to this day. It happened at this place that I'd been working at for a couple of years at that point. The place was a small factory of sorts, with only less than a handful of employees, including myself. One day though, my boss introduced us to this new, older guy that he'd brought in to start working in the other, newer side of the factory. You see, the factory where he worked had two different sides to it. One side for beeswax and one side for wood production. My boss had brought him in because they went to church together, and the wood production on the other side had a religious significance. The new, older coworker worked there with us for about 1 month before he approached me one day and introduced himself to me. He seemed like a nice guy and even came back to give me a Hershey kiss not long after that. A couple of months later, I got asked by our boss if I could go pick up my new older coworker. Probably because his car was broken down or something. I agreed to it. So my boss asked me if it was okay to give the coworker my phone number so that we could coordinate via text. I said it was fine and went on my way. I brought him back to the factory with no problems. Soon after that though, I started to get random and sporadic texts from him late at night. At first, the texts were just about us, maybe hanging out soon, while simultaneously apologizing to me because he knew he was much older than I. But then, the texts started to get pretty pervy, and they would be as long as a mini book. The texts were just long, misspelled, random, pervy compilations. I tried to just ignore the texts, but that only made them start coming more frequently. In the midst of all this, one day, my roommates were scrounging for a ride to a casino only a few miles from our house. I gave them a few dollars for a ride, and they said that they'd find their own ride back. So imagine my surprise when they returned only a couple of hours later with their own ride. Alright, their ride was my creepy coworker. Not only was I creeped the hell out that this pervy jerk now knew where I lived, but I also didn't know how he came to give my roommates that ride. Was it just sheer coincidence or something more? A few days after that, I went to visit a friend at his apartment that was located on our main street running through our small, historic downtown area. When I came downstairs from his apartment, as he was located on the second floor, I made my usual turn, walking on the sidewalk in front of all the main street shops. As I walked past one of the shops that was maybe 2 doors down from my friend's apartment, I thought I saw something out of the corner of my eye, but it couldn't be, could it? To my great dismay, it was him. My creepy-ass older coworker standing in the doorway of one of the shops and smiling creepily at me from under a black top hat. A couple of weeks after that little incident, I noticed him again as I left my friend's apartment. He was just standing on the sidewalk with that same creepy grin plastered on his gaunt face. Since I'd already informed my friend after the last incident, I simply texted him real quick to let him know the creep was back. I got into my car and left after sending the text, so I didn't find out until later that the creepy coworker was gone by the time my friend got downstairs to the sidewalk. At that point, the texts were still coming even faster than before. He was even threatening to come by my house if I didn't respond. Long, provocative texts dictating what he'd like to have happen between us if he did just happen to show up at my house. When I would see him during the day at work though, he would act as though everything were normal, giving no hint of his nighttime persona. After seeing him yet again as I left my friend's apartment, I just so happened to overhear a couple of coworkers standing around discussing how weird our new, older coworker was. Right then, I stepped in and joined the conversation, finally showing one of my other coworkers the text messages that the creep had been sending me. I'd been working with that particular coworker for a few years, but I didn't know him too well. He was one of those people who came off kind of grumpy and distant. Still, I told him and my other coworker not to say anything. They both nodded in agreement. And we went our separate ways to finish up for the day. When I came into work the next day, my boss immediately called me into his office. My boss told me that he'd been informed of the situation and the texts, and he wanted to see my phone to read them. I told my boss that I didn't really want to get anyone in trouble, but he said that was beside the point, and that my situation needed to be addressed. My boss also stated that my older coworker had no right or reason to be texting me and talking to me the way he was talking to me. The boss must have had a pretty good talk with him, because all the crap stopped from the older coworker after that. The other grumpy coworker of mine apologized to me for saying something to the boss, but I completely understood, and I was actually pretty grateful to him for that. I should have been the one to take the initiative to talk to the boss about it, but I was just too chicken. Fortunately, though, that situation seemed to work out for all involved, because life went on as usual, and everyone involved acted as though nothing had ever happened. Well, I can't really say that, because that situation actually caused the grumpy coworker and me to talk more, and we started dating. We were together for about 3 years, and then we got married. So creepy, old coworker. Let's not ever meet again, or I think my husband will certainly have something to say about it. I never really believed in the paranormal or supernatural. I always thought the stories about people being haunted or possessed were just stories made up for entertainment, or cases of severely mentally ill patients being misunderstood by fanatical priests claiming demonic possession. I never suspected that they were actually real. But when I was 13, my naive brain would be put in its place. It was the summer of 2007. Life was good. I had a pretty normal teenage life. I had a few friends my age who lived in the same neighborhood as me, and we would do a lot of outdoor activities like hiking, mountain biking, and fishing. We lived just north of the Ozark Mountains in a nice little town in Arkansas. My father had worked very hard to give us all a good life. He came from a poor family and joined the military at 18 to better his future, and it paid off. He got a good job working on airplanes, and we moved to the country. My parents got a steal on a really nice old house in the village. It was a nice little community built into the woods, which had golf courses, private lakes, and trails, and its own shopping center with a harps and a couple of restaurants. We were a happy, normal, middle-class family. That is, until that. There were a lot of local legends about the natives that used to inhabit the area. Supposedly, our entire community was built on top of sacred land. I used to walk the trails near my house a lot, and you could find cliffs and overhangs with Indian paintings on the walls and remnants of their civilization. I always felt bad about how they were driven from their homes by my ancestors, but I was still grateful for my home and wonderful life. The kids at school would often scare each other by telling tales of shamans summoning skinwalkers and rakes, and that to this day, they still haunt the woods at night, looking for a midnight snack. I always laughed it off. Ghosts and monsters aren't real. They're just made-up stories to scare kids. I always thought the ghost hunter shows were ridiculous. You wouldn't hear or see anything on camera, but the people on the show would jump at a creek in the night, and suspenseful music would play, while the camera focused on empty darkness. Those shows can be fun for the imagination, but the reality of paranormal entities is much more terrifying. They can tear apart families and bring your whole world crashing down. I would learn this dark reality one summer night. The air was cool. I had my window open, and I could hear the wind flowing through the leaves. The cicadas reverberating through the midnight woods put me in a sleepy trance. I relaxed and drifted off to sleep. In such a peaceful place, I was completely safe. I always felt one with the woods. It really is beautiful here. Cradled in the sounds of nature, I drifted deep into sleep. Then a wave of panic. I felt every hair stand up. Chills ran down my spine. I felt the eyes of someone on me. I could feel their sinister intent. Every fiber in me was telling me to run. There was something here that wanted to kill me. No, worse. It wanted to own me, to see me suffer. It had been watching me. For a long time. I had been chosen. I couldn't breathe. Help me! Help me! I screamed. Mom! I heard laughter. Not human, not a physical voice. Multiple voices of all octaves laughing at once. I couldn't open my eyes. I couldn't open my eyes. I couldn't breathe or talk, but I saw its eyes. Blue, bloodshot, bulging eyes. Huge pupils. Redness filled my mind. I felt immense pressure. My entire body vibrated, and I felt like I was going to explode. I gasped as I fully awakened, but as I opened my eyes, I froze. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Through my open door, I could see something lying on our living room couch. It was clearly visible, but clearly not a person. It was like a flowing shadow, but with a certain ethereal quality. The moonlight illuminated its face, a skull with a sinister smile. It had those same eyes from my dream, huge, bulging, wide, open eyes, crystal blue pupils. It stared at me, smiling, awkwardly sprawled out on the couch. Its shadowy body like a translucent butt pitch. Black cloak flowed as if underwater. Even as I narrate this, chills run down my spine, and I want to emphasize that this is not a work of fiction. This really happened. I was so scared I was frozen in place. Electricity seemed to course up and down my spine, through my brain. My eyes were wide and watering. My mouth hung open. It stared into my eyes, into my mind, for what felt like hours. Then, it quickly shifted out of sight. It darted down the couch and disappeared into the shadows. Adrenaline surged through me, and I ran into my parents' room. Bursting through the door, panting and covered in sweat, I sought refuge. At first, my parents were annoyed, responding in the way parents usually do when faced with something like this. But as I described every detail of my encounter, and as they saw the genuine terror in my eyes, unease and fear began to replace their initial skepticism. My father, being a devout Christian, believed in demons, and he was convinced that I had been tormented, and that our family was in danger. The seriousness in his eyes was palpable. He woke up my little sister, and the entire family gathered in the living room. Oh, how I wish my father had never done what he did next. He retrieved his Bible and turned the pages to a verse. I don't quite recall the actual verse, but it was something about casting out demons. In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to leave my family alone. He yelled angrily, cursing the demon. If you want one of us, take me. Leave my family alone. We sat in the living room, talking well into the night, and eventually, exhaustion took over, and we all went back to bed. However, sleep eluded me. I couldn't forget those eyes, its evil smile, and the way it moved. It was deeply disturbing. Months passed, and life returned to some semblance of normalcy. My sister and I went back to school, and for the most part, I had pushed the demon to the back of my mind, dismissing it as a bad dream, or perhaps sleep paralysis. Despite that being the only time sleep paralysis had ever occurred to me, I carried on with my life. Until the day we received the worst news I had ever heard. My father was diagnosed with a rare form of bone cancer, and it had already spread. He was dying. Devastation washed over us. I clung to my father, crying throughout that day. I couldn't comprehend the fact that I was going to lose him. He had always been so strong, so seemingly healthy. The strange thing was, even the doctors were puzzled. His cancer typically only affected teenagers, boys in their early teens. This revelation shocked me and left me feeling guilty. The memory of the demon came rushing back, and I recalled my father's words to it. I couldn't help but think that the demon had set its sights on me but instead went after my father. I wish it had taken me instead. My family would be much better off today if it had. Despite his diagnosis, my father remained positive. He attended chemotherapy sessions, adopted a healthier lifestyle, and exercised as much as his weakened body allowed. With his bald head and amputated leg, people would often approach him to express gratitude for his service. He would laugh and graciously accept their thanks, even though his condition was far worse than if he had stepped on an eyed. He lived for 3 more years, defying the doctor's grim prognosis. Throughout his illness, he maintained a cheerful demeanor, primarily for the sake of our family. But as time went on, he began to deteriorate slowly. It was agonizing to witness. I felt utterly helpless, unable to alleviate his suffering. The man I had always looked up to, the one who protected us and whom I had perceived as invincible, was crumbling before my eyes. He lost weight rapidly, and in his final days, he chose to sleep on the couch so as not to disturb my mother. He was so frail, so sick. The sounds of his labored breathing and moans filled the house, and all I wanted was to ease his pain in any way possible. What haunts me to this day is the realization that he started to resemble the demon more and more. His body grew thin, almost skeletal, and his once vibrant blue eyes stared at me, mirroring the malevolence I'd seen in the demon's gaze. It was as if the demon had been mocking me, imitating the fate it intended for my father while viciously smiling. The sheer wickedness of it infuriated me. How could something be so vile, so irredeemably evil? My poor father eventually succumbed to his illness, leaving us as a broken family. My mother fell into a deep depression, and I took on the role of caregiver for my little sister, attempting to be the best father figure I could, despite feeling like a woefully inadequate substitute. As our financial struggles deepened, we fell behind on bills, and the bank foreclosed on our house. We lost everything. The following years were a relentless struggle. But now, as an adult, I have managed to establish some semblance of stability in my life. Recently, during a visit with my sister, we broached the topic of ghosts and the paranormal. I asked if she had ever experienced anything similar to what I had encountered. For a brief moment, she hesitated, and then she shared something that sent shivers down my spine. She was very young on the night I saw the demon, and her memories of that time had faded. But she revealed to me that she used to see a shadowy figure standing at the end of her bed. A figure with a skull for a face. Demons are real. The horrifying encounters we experienced were not the products of imagination or fantasy. They are a haunting reality that has left an indelible mark on our lives. The demon's presence brought devastation, grief, and profound loss to our family. And even now, years later, its sinister presence lingers in the darkest corners of our memories, a chilling reminder of the unfathomable evil that exists in the world.